I'm excited today. I have a very special guest, JB Copeland, and I am excited he's here today. And he's going to share his health journey, battling through anxiety, fear, I think some drug addiction.
A lot of drugs.
So I'm just going to let him roll with. He can tell me his and share with you his experience.
Yeah, thanks for having me on today. I'm excited about it. But yeah, I'll start at the beginning, and if you have questions, you can just stop me. So was born in Shreveport, Louisiana, the firstborn out of 3 brothers. I'm 4 years older than my middle brother and 9 years older than my youngest brother. And dad was a pastor. Mom was a pastor's wife. And, you know, childhood was good. I mean, I have good memories growing up. But my dad was my coach. And this is where things kind of got a little bit slimy. I love my dad, and we've gone through a lot of healing, but being that firstborn son, there was a lot of pressure to be good at sports. I don't know what it was, but it was not only sports, but be good at being a Christian. And I think that there was a lot of shame involved in that. And so that wasn't what they were trying to, my parents, they weren't trying to, bring that on me. But it was the environment that they were raised in, or that they were in at the time as well, of you have to do this, and if you don't do this, then you're not good, and blah, 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 blah. So I have memories growing up of my dad, just being really tough on me. And, growing up, you're like, well, just don't be soft. You're a man, you play sports, this is just how it goes. But when you're a little boy and, if you strike out, or if you walk someone, or if, in baseball or whatever it might be, and the reaction is like bad, I have a lot of those memories just like in my head. It kind of began to shape me into this fear mentality. If I don't perform, I'm not good enough. And so it's such a little thing, but it really shaped me. And so, growing up it was that. And then on the other side of it, it was, my dad was a pastor. He was my coach. He was my dad. And so the lines were very blurred. And so that's kind of really where it all started, was within being raised up in that type of home. And my parents they loved me. And, but I was overparented for sure. And it was from a place, looking back, from a place of fear. They didn't want bad things. They didn't want me to go to hell. They didn't want me to, not be great at what I did, all these little things. And so that was communicated to me at a very young age, and that followed me through my life.
Wow, I can see, that's one thing, parents, we love our kids. I know I'm not a biological parent, but I feel like I have lots of kids, spiritual kids. But I know this is the whole thing with parenting. We love our kids. And so we do want to make sure the messages that we're communicating, I would say his parents were communicating excellence when really it came off as perfectionism. Would you agree with that,
For sure,
Byron?
yes.
So what are some of the messages, or how could those messages have been different to achieve excellence?
There's a quote that I love, and it's that reassurance is a love language. And especially for those walking through hard times, but I think for a little kid, reassurance and encouragement and speaking life is so important. Not saying that my parents didn't, right, because they did. My dad prayed for me every night. He told me he loved me every day. So it's same with my mom. But I think it all starts with, where's the parent at? Yep. Where is their emotional state at? What are their beliefs? Because no matter what they say, there's energy behind what they actually feel. I believe. Mm-hmm. And so, I found myself being an extreme people pleaser because I was a parent pleaser. And I think that there was also some unhealthiness in their marriage. And so if things were wrong, I felt responsible. And I had to make sure mom was good, or and I was hyper aware of her feelings, little things, like she would like breathe hard. Like, and this is still something that I do today. Like she'll go, and I'll be like, "Are you okay?" And it's just like instant. And I'm like, "What?" Like, and I think that I just always knew when something was off. And if something was off, I was off. I had to make sure that everything was good. And I don't know where that came from, but I think it came from just being in a crazy environment. Not that it was like, alcoholic father, like my mom was raised under, but it was overbearing and from this motivation that was not faith, I don't believe. I think it was control and fear that they were dealing with as well from whoever that they came from.
Right.
So yeah, I think how could it have been communicated better? I think it comes down to if the parent is going after healing, then I think whatever they communicate is going to be communicated better, depending on where they're at internally.
I agree. So I think it's probably very common for teenagers, kids that are in sports, to sometimes the parents are living vicariously through their kids, right? And they do want you to be successful. And it's hard sometimes to find that balance of I'm pushing them to be excellent, but I also need them to feel like their value is not in their ability. So I think it is parents, I would just say it is very important that we examine. I think I shared on one of my podcasts, I had to examine where does the intensity of my words come from? And mine was coming from anger or fear. And so I think sometimes we project, right, our anxiety, our fear. His parents really wanted him to be successful at sports, really wanted, and I'm sure they thought, well, number one, I know he was good at sports. So not only are you good, but I want you to go to the top. So that can be a very positive, it looks like motivation. But it's important as a parent to examine, is this what my child wants? Is this what he needs for his development? Or is this what I want? I'm not saying that's where his parents were coming from, but I think that's a good question to ask ourselves in parenting is, do I want this for the child because I want them to achieve and be this, or is this what the child wants? So I think that's very important. So JB, where would you say drove you to maybe start into the alcohol or drugs? And when was that in your life?
Yeah, I was a pretty good kid, always got voted by my teachers the best kid in class up to about 5th grade. And then, at about in 6th grade, your friends become more important. And I was more worried about did my friends like me than was I being a good student. And so, my junior year in high school, I was at a country concert and I had my first sip of alcohol. It was actually going into my junior year that summer. And it was awesome. I felt accepted. But not only that, but I didn't know, the anxiety that I had was normal. And when it subsided, when I drank that, I was like, whoa, I like the way that this feels. At the same time, I'm dealing with a lot of guilt and shame because I'm hiding it from my parents but yeah, I think this is what I think drove me to it, is it goes back to my parents. And like I said, when you're going through this healing process, you got to realize no one's perfect. They did everything that they could do with what they'd been given. And this is what I found out is through healing is my dad was extremely underfathered. The men in his life, he didn't feel like, and they didn't ever really come through. There was no really emotional attachment. My mom was also underparented. Her dad was an alcoholic, would do crazy things. She would, be at his house and then her parents got divorced. And so both of my parents came from broken homes. Now, my dad's broken home looked a little bit different. The family's still together. I love my grandparents, but it was emotional unavailability. For my mom, it was just emotionally chaotic. And so what was, from my mom's side of things, it was fear, fear, fear. Like, I'm anxious. I don't want, and you could feel that. For my dad, it was over father, I want you to be great. You need to be great. Perform if you're, and so it was being raised under that. And then, through sports, and I love sports. I was good at it, but, I also began to develop fear with, I remember my 7th grade year, I was at South Lake Carroll, and they're a huge football program in Texas. And this was the first year my dad wasn't my coach. And one of the coaches would just scream at us, and it was just bad. And that is when I started to develop a dread and an anxiety for sports. But that was where all my friends were. Yep. That was the cool thing to do. That's where I knew I would be accepted. And so it was this, if the coaches are like this, then, how I was raised was right. This is what's expected for a boy or a man that's in sports. And so I think what happened was each year just added a layer. Each year added a layer of more worry, more fear. And then going into my junior year, I was going to be starting on varsity. Wow. And I was so nervous. And there was a love for the game of football, which is what I played going into high school, but the nerves and the dread and the anxiety and the morning workouts and knowing that I was going to get screamed at in film and all this stuff, it was just a fear mentality, fear-based environment that I was in. And so that's what led me to that first drink. Now, I didn't know I was looking for it, but I was looking for acceptance, and acceptance with community and friends, but then I realized I was also looking for relief. And so the drinking and the weed started after that, and it was the only thing that would numb the feelings that I had of these performance feelings. I don't think I knew how to feel them. It was just you shut it off and you perform. And that's when it began to catch up with me. And so senior year, same thing. Freshman year in college on scholarship, smoking every day, And then my junior year, I get popped for a drug test.
And this was in college?
This was in college. Division I, North Carolina. My parents don't know that I'm doing this, so they probably had their suspicions. But, coach calls my dad. I get put on, I get my hand slapped because it was one drug fail. A year later, I fail another one. A few months after that, I fail a third one. And I get kicked off scholarship my senior year. But I literally, in my head, it was either I feel terrible or I do something to temporarily take away whatever this is. I didn't know how to feel it. And so, that's where that was at. And then from there, from getting kicked off scholarship, that's all I knew was football. And at the same time, I was retired due to concussions. So, I lost what I thought who I was. And, so that's when things got really bad.
And what did you do then? How did you start the journey of healing? Or would you let people help you at that point? Or were you angry, and where were you?
I wanted help.
You wanted help.
I can't tell you how many times I prayed, or I went down for prayer, or I went to church camp, or I did this or that, or I wanted this feeling to go away, but it wouldn't. And so I was like, screw this. I'm not going to feel this way.
Yeah.
And addiction was a thing that I dealt with. And, within the addiction cycle, there's a thing called a firm resolution to quit. And it's after you've been caught or after you've gone and hit rock bottom, you really make a firm resolution to say, I'm done, I need help, and I mean this. And then a couple of days later, a couple of hours later, a couple of weeks later, a couple of months later, you're back in this restless, irritable state that you have to begin using again. And so it was just the addiction cycle, the shame cycle. It was over and over, and I couldn't stop up until, 4 or 5 years after college.
Wow. And then, so even 4 or 5 years after college.
Yeah.
So what do you say was your final breaking point? And what was your healing journey? How long are you sober now and living free of the addiction?
Almost 2 years. So, after college, I didn't go to the NFL. I retired. That was my hope, to go to the NFL. And I came back home, and at that time, I was engaged to my wife now. And, I couldn't be open with my parents, so I'm not going to be open with her. Like, there's a wall up. Because my core trauma was I'm not enough, and if I tell you how I feel and what I'm going through, then I'm proving to you that I'm not, and I'm proving to myself that I'm not. And so, me and my wife had a pretty hard couple first years because she would catch me, I would lie. Like I said, I'd make a firm resolution. I'd promise to her, I'd swear I'm done, and then I would hide it. After weeks or months or whatever that I'd gone. And so, that was kind of where I was at with that. And April of 2022, I was a youth pastor at the church my dad worked for in Dallas. And through this whole time, I've been struggling. On the outside, everything was good. The youth group was growing, seemed to be flourishing. I was being celebrated, it's how it had always been with football, with whatever. The performance. And, starting 2022, I also started to taking Adderall, because I just didn't have any energy. I was on opioids and weed and Adderall all at the same time. Opioids and weed were kind of what I was on for a long time, but when I started taking Adderall to give me this energy to go, I started losing a ton of weight. And so over probably 4 months, I dropped 40 pounds, and I just looked terrible. So end of April 2022, my wife knows what's up. I'm just this is where I'm at. I can't do anything. My parents, again, they have suspicions, but I'm a youth pastor. There's no way a youth pastor's addicted to substances. And I had a panic attack April 27th, and it was 11 p.m. I thought I was dying for sure. I thought I was having a heart attack. My eyes were twitching. It was the most excruciating feeling. So I got rushed to the ER, and my dad shows up at 3 a.m. and they show him my blood test, and there's amphetamines, and there's opioids, and there's THC, and he's like, "What are you doing?" And and I'm just playing it off, had a bad night, I've been stressed out, blah blah blah. Chloe doesn't know what to do because, she understands that my parents might be a little bit overbearing. She doesn't know, she's confused, and so I ended up just getting honest and saying, "Hey," well, I got kind of honest, and I told my oversight, my campus pastor, and my dad, who was on the executive team, so he was my boss's boss's boss, which was weird, that I was having addictive thoughts and behavior, I needed counseling, which really I was just in full-blown addiction. And so I ended up going to counseling with an awesome therapist. Her name is Nancy Houston, and we met probably 4 times from May to early June. And at the end of it, she was like, "Look, I can't help you. You need to go to rehab." And I was like, "There ain't no way that I'm going. There's no way that I'm going to go to rehab. I've never even thought about going to rehab. If anything, I need to go to a freedom session or something. I don't know. I need more prayer," which I definitely didn't. And so I was like, "I'm good. I'm good with that. But Chloe was there with me, and she ended up having a conversation with my parents a couple days before Father's Day in 2022, so mid-June, and was like, JB needs help. I don't know what to do. And so, the Monday after Father's Day, my dad calls me. I'm at work, feeling terrible, as always. And he's like, hey, can you come up to the central offices, there's a central offices for the church that we work for. And I was like, yeah. And so I did, and they ended up putting me on FMLA and telling me I'm going to rehab. And I was like, okay, I'll do it. Like, I don't think this is going to work, but I'll do it. And next day I get my mom, my dad, and my wife drive me to Waxahachie, Texas, and drop me off at a country ranch style barn dominium looking, horses, all this stuff. They just dropped me off and see you in 90 days. And no phone. And it just was like, I had to feel all the feelings that I'd been numbing. And so that's when the sobriety journey started.
Wow. What do you think the key is to staying sober?
I have my own opinions on it. Mm-hmm. I don't know if the recovery community would exactly agree with me. I think it all comes down to faith and mindset. Mm-hmm. A lot of the times when I was walking through, the time in rehab, we would go to AA and stuff like that, and which really helped me at the time. The 12 steps really helped me. Right. But what I think it came down to was God had to answer a couple things. I had to be reintroduced to God is what actually happened, because I don't think I ever knew him. And so, what has kept me sober is I feel like, and there's a scripture that says, God does not give me a spirit of fear. And I for sure had a foundational spirit. Like I was running off fear. That was my foundation. That was my, the thing that I always fell back on was I'm making decisions based off of fear. Lack mindset, and, so when I was there at rehab, I had no way to control anything. I had no phone. I had no way to reach out to my wife or parents. What they do is they hold you up, and you just gotta face your demons. And so it was just me, myself, God, and the devil. Yeah. And so I just had to let go. And I think the first thing that really began to break that down was I was just being tortured there mentally, and it was just it was about finances for some reason. Certain things will start tormenting you, and these thoughts will take you over. And it's $60,000 to be at this rehab, and I was like, how am I going to pay for this? I don't want my dad to pay for it. I don't want the church to pay for it. So I'm freaking out. How am I going to pay for this? And so I just felt like God said, will you just surrender it? Believe that it's taken care of. I think that's what surrender is believing. Yes. And so I was like, okay. So every single day, probably 150 times a day, because it was torturing me. This thought would come to my mind. I'd start freaking out. I'd start having extreme anxiety, and I would just say, God, I cannot handle this BS. You have to take this, and I don't know what you're going to do. So over and over and over. 3 weeks go by, and they call me in, and they put me on scholarship. And I was like, that's an answer. That's an answer right there. And that was a huge moment for me, because this foundation of fear then just began to crack. And then the next day I start being tortured about the restoration of my family. But it didn't torture me as much because of what God had just did. And so I said, look, the family week's coming up, after it'll be the end of rehab, it's coming up in a couple weeks. God, you answered that, and you answered the finances. I'm on scholarship. I don't even know how. I don't even know why you like me right now. I'm a youth pastor that's at rehab. I would think that you were going to punish me or something, So it's like, and So I said, look, God, I'm going to surrender this to you. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm done worrying because I know that you'll answer. But will you restore my family? I'll be completely honest. I'll be humble. I'll apologize in therapy. I'll go first in all the group therapy there. I will be attentive to detail. Whatever you want me to do, I'll do. That's in my control. And the rest of it's in your control. And that's a quote that I love, and it's, if I do the natural, God will do the supernatural.
Yes.
And so I did the natural. And what happened was there was a restoration of my family that I could have never dreamt up. It wasn't just like, oh, we're all at peace and they're good with me,
Right.
which would probably have been what I would have wanted. But it was, there was restoration between my wife and my mom. They're best friends now. They weren't before. They didn't like each other. There's restoration between my dad and my wife, my brothers and me, me and my dad, my mom. So it was like this intertwined restoration that kind of shook my family to the core. All that religiousness, gone. We're still walking through it a little bit, but it was just like the foundations of our family were shook from that family week experience. And so after that happened, I was like, okay, I don't have to worry anymore. I can live from a place of abundance, and I believe that I'm healed. A lot of people think addiction is a disease, and it could be. I don't know, but I think it stemmed from my childhood trauma. And I think that I'm recovered. And I think that the parts of me that were hurting and the parts of me that had buried, I have worked through and I've walked with. And, I don't think about drugs. I don't think about, I'm not trying to not be sober, or I'm not trying to be sober. I'm trying to live my best life. It's I think that's the other thing is like when we have this lack mindset, it's like the best we can do is be sober. I don't think that that's
A good mindset.
a good mindset. I think that's a fear mindset. If I don't do this, and this, I'm going to relapse. No, I'm not going to. That's not even on the radar.
Right.
That was back then. Now, I'm going to live my best life. Jesus promised abundant life, so that's what I'm going to do, and I believe that. And so I had to work through some of that stuff with, some of the groups I was going to, and why did that person just say something and it struck fear in me? Mm-hmm. Well, if it's making me fearful, unless a bear's chasing me, if it's making me fearful, these words, then it's probably not God. And so I'm not going to buy into that. I'm not going to relapse because I don't do exactly what you say, And so it was kind of like I had like this new understanding of if it makes me fearful, it's not God. So I'm not going to listen to it. And your word curse is not going to be able to mess with me. And so, yeah, that's kind of how that started. And after rehab, I was like, I'm for sure getting fired. I'm like the only pastor at the church I was at that's ever gone to rehab for sure. And they called me in and were like, we want you here. And I was like, are you sure? Because, I don't even I have more questions than answers now, when it comes to all this religion. I don't know if you want me pastoring these kids, because I'm just going to be real with them. And they're like, no, we want you here. And I was like, okay. So I came back, was there for 6 months. There was so much restoration and honesty and a safe place for the kids and for them to know that their pastor was human,
Yes.
but not just human, but could overcome, that they could overcome. And so there was a lot of restoration there. And then in March of 2023, almost a year later from the panic attacks, I resigned and felt like I was supposed to do something else. And yeah, now it's like what happened from that moment or those moments of pure fear and no control in rehab brought me to a place to where I was finally in tune with, you can call it the Holy Spirit, you can call it your intuition, I feel like I can listen to that peace and I'll follow it. And if it makes me feel fearful or if it makes me feel I know God's voice now, and I'm going to listen to it. And so I think that's the biggest thing that came from it was I trust God. I trust his voice, and I don't care what he asks me to do. I'm going to do it because everything in me has to do it. Because if I don't, like, that would be going against my own grain. Like, it was just this new understanding and this new relationship with God. And so, yeah, now I'm in the creative space and, social media and video and stuff like that. And I'm loving it, and life is really good.
That's amazing. That's amazing. What a great testimony. So many things I could point out there. But do you see the power of healing? I mean, as one person heals, it permeates, it spreads. And that's how generation to generation we break those curses. They say alcoholism, it's generation to generation, it's passed down. I'm with JB in that I do believe it's a mindset that leads to the drug addiction. There is addiction. I did a podcast yesterday with a couple that their son struggles with addiction, truly addicted to alcohol. But I think many times it's the anxiety, the fear that it's like, I just have to get rid of this pain inside, and I don't know how. And that's where we start with the medication. We start with self-medicating. So I think it is important that as we start finding, as JB did, looking at what created this, what created the insecurities, what created the drive of trying to be perfect and please everybody, live up to other people's expectations. Once I recognize where that's coming from, now, how do I reparent myself? How do I go back to that time, say to that little boy or that little girl, look, this is what you struck out at that game. What would you say to that? What would you say to that child? We have to go back and kind of reparent ourselves. You know what? You did the best you could at that age. You did the best you could. And you know what? You're going to do great next time. So practice, learn, and be the best you can be. Sometimes we just have to reparent ourselves, right? That's called getting healed and going back and look at our adverse childhood events and then redefining those moments. And wow, the power of people being honest. His parents and his wife, the healing for JB would not have been as powerful if his parents wouldn't have owned their childhood events and what created in them how they parented. So there again, everybody taking responsibility for their own mental and emotional health, their response to their childhood events, and then how are we going to all move forward? There were probably a lot of difficult and challenging conversations through that healing. It's always challenging, and this is where we can run from those hard conversations, or we can embrace the tension and learn how to work through it. And this is what we want to teach our kids. How do you have those hard conversations? When you said this, I felt this. I heard this. It doesn't mean that you intended me to hear that or feel that. That's just what I heard when you said that. And the way that you said it, this is what I felt. This is what I interpreted from that. And then as a parent, I am so sorry that you received it that way. That is not what I intended for you to receive. Those are healing conversations. Those are hard conversations because we're very vulnerable at that point. Yes, thank you so much, JB.
Yeah, and I want to add one more thing. That one of the things that really helped me the most, that if you're watching this and you feel like you're stuck, is I did something called a resentment list. And what a resentment list is you write out every single resentment that you have. And now resentment isn't something, it can be something that you hate, but really it's something that you're not at peace with. And so it's a people, places, institutions, things, religions, whatever. And, like I said, I was a people pleaser. So they're like, write out your resentments. And I was like, I don't have any resentments. And I'll talk to people and they'll be like, I don't have any. I'm like, after like a week of thinking about it, I had 85. Yeah. So you got resentments, and at the top of those resentments were the people closest to me, and the church and football, the things that, were what drove me, and the things that I was usually the things that we love the most, we resent the most. And like I said, it means that there's something that you're not at peace with. It means that there's something that needs to be mended. And so on what happens is you take this list and you write the first resentment, and then you write, why am I resentful? What happened? And how did this affect me? And you do this for every single resentment. But then you turn it over, the page over, and you write the same resentment, and you write, where was I wrong? Where was I selfish? Where did I lie? And how did this affect the relationship as a whole? And what's crazy is your resentments turn out to be the ones that you say sorry to as well. Because the things that we resent the most, whether it be our parents, I'm not a victim. And victim mentality and believing people are against you and the world is against you is what's going to keep you stuck. Your victim mentality. And so what a resentment list is trying to do is showing that you weren't the one that was wronged by yourself. There's so many times I lied to my parents. Yeah. Now, it might have stemmed from something that they did, but the way that I reacted wasn't how I should have reacted. You know, with football, you know, I had a resentment that how these coaches, treated me. Well, I failed 3 drug tests and got kicked off scholarship at a school that trusted me and put hundreds of thousands of dollars into me. You know, coming to grips with the fact that you're not Mr. Perfect or Mrs. Perfect, and the freedom and understanding that you can let these resentments go and ask for forgiveness for your side of it. Yeah. Like with my parents, like I could have definitely been a better kid, or I could have definitely been honest, or I could have definitely, whatever it might have been. But if you think it's all just them, now there's definitely things right. that people could have done to you. When you were young, that you had no control over. But what came from that? What did that turn you into? Who were the people that you harmed from what they did to you? And it's coming to peace with understanding that, dang, I've messed up too. It's not just about everyone else. And, after that resentment list and going through it and going over it with the person, you say a prayer. And the prayer is, God, will you please take away these deficiencies, these character deficiencies, these things that I've, this victim mentality, this thing where I think that the world's against me and I've done no wrong, and the way that I'm acting, I have, permission to act this way because of what they did. Yeah. So and then after you pray that prayer, you begin to make amends to those people. My biggest apologies were to my biggest resentments. So good. My parents, my wife, even North Carolina, trying to get in touch with them and reach out to them and be like, dang, I really wasted away this, and y'all put money into this, and y'all, believed in me when I didn't believe in me. And, for a while there, I didn't like you. I didn't like North Carolina, whatever it might be. And so if you're stuck, do a resentment list and get honest about it, be thorough, and then share it with the person that you trust. And get those things out of you, because I believe resentments are the pathway to, living a life of being unhealed. Yeah. And living a life of, I call it spiritual death. It is. Because you're so resentful that you can't see, what does Jesus say? Like, you're talking about the speck in their eye when you have a log in yours. Yeah. There's a log in our eyes, and we are acting out from a place of hurt, and you probably were hurt, but that doesn't excuse the actions that have come from it and the hurt that you've caused others. And so that doesn't mean I have to sit and sulk in I've made so many mistakes. It's not about that either. We've all made mistakes, but it's about getting right and cleaning my side of the street. And if I clean my side of the street, God will take care of the rest. And that is the thing that really helped me more than anything, is understanding those resentments.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Thank you for sharing so much. I think this is going to help so many people with their own kids, with their own healing. We just see the power of living in healing. And I will say, for those that are of the Christian faith, we're not immune. Nobody's immune to this life, the hardships of life. Things happen to us. And as JB was saying, yes, we don't always have control over what happens to us. What we do have control over is our response to it. And so, yeah, I look at my mother. She was abused as a child from her stepfather until she was 17. But can I tell you, he died probably 10, 15 years later. But for the next 50 years, he wounded her continually. She could never forgive him. So when you live in forgiveness, there's a saying that says, I drink the poison of unforgiveness, and then I think it's going to hurt them. Like, she thought her forgiving him would say it's okay for what he did. No, he abused her. It was never okay. But her not forgiving him and walking and learning forgiveness kept her constantly hurt and living a very unproductive life. So I know this is a heavy topic, but I love that JB shared. Thank you so much. And I think that's very helpful for so many people. You can be healed, and you can live a productive life. Thank you so much for joining us today. Have a great day.